I knew something was sideways the second my Slack pinged at 11:43 p.m. on a Friday night. The message was from Ryan Mercer, VP of Operations, a man whose haircut probably cost more than my office chair. "Turn in your badge." That was it. No context, no greeting, no HR, not even punctuation. Just 7 syllables of smug tech bro finality. I stared at it for a few seconds, half expecting a follow-up like LOL JK or some idiotic emoji. Nothing. Just that message, sitting there in the glow of my laptop like a bad breakup text from a man who calls himself a founder. I'd kept Vanguard systems alive for 6 years, through 3 reorganizations, 2 failed acquisitions, and 1 full-blown ransomware nightmare that almost torched the company. The only reason we didn't lose everything was because I personally called our off-site backup vendor from my father's funeral. And now this, fired over Slack, after midnight, like I was overdue returning a library book. The funny part? I didn't cry. Not a tear. Maybe I'd already been grieving the place for months without realizing it. You don't notice rot until someone pokes it and the whole thing caves in. I closed my laptop, methodically packed my things. Drawer, mug, charger. The mug I'd stolen from conference room D. The USB drive labeled meal prep notes that was actually SOC 2 audit templates. My hand hesitated over my badge before I placed it perfectly centered on Ryan's desk, magnetic strip facing up. Because I am polite, even when seething, but before I walked out, I logged one final task: initiate vendor failover protocol. Let me explain before anyone jumps to the Reddit aha revenge chorus. This wasn't sabotage, it was procedure. When an employee with elevated credentials is terminated without proper succession protocol, a system-wide failover is automatically triggered. It exists because when you're managing interlinked vendor networks held together by 12 years of duct-taped policy, somebody has to slam the brakes before the whole thing implodes. That somebody used to be me. So I triggered it, clicked confirm, walked out. I spent the weekend ignoring my phone. Unknown numbers, Slack notifications trying to slip past deactivation. A couple of LinkedIn requests from people who definitely never liked me. I let the kettle whistle while I poured tea, slow and deliberate. The world could burn for all I cared. Because here's what they didn't understand. When the failover activates, all critical systems go read-only. Temp credentials are revoked, and vendors are notified that reactivation requires the designated compliance officer's approval. It's not personal, it's just the rulebook. And guess who wrote the rulebook? Ryan, bless his protein shake brain, had probably never read past the first slide of the compliance deck. He thought I was legacy glue, the quiet woman you nod to in meetings and forget exists until someone asks, "Does Melissa have access to that?" Yes. Yes, Melissa had access. Melissa was the access. By Monday morning, the hangover from Ryan's arrogance was already brewing. I'd done 2 loads of laundry, meal-prepped quinoa bowls, trimmed my cat's nails, and caught half an episode of Judge Judy. Meanwhile, 8:07 a.m. Ryan opened the company all-hands call with a syrupy line. "Team, we've cleared some legacy bandwidth and are streamlining our vendor stack." Translation: I just fired the only person who knew which cable ran where, and I think I'm a visionary. He even bragged about talking to 3 new vendors. Names that sounded ripped straight from a startup podcast. One of them had Ninja in the name. That's how you know it's garbage. The Zoom chat was silent except for fake keyboard clicks. I could picture my old compliance lead, Danny, muting herself halfway through, just staring blankly at the screen like someone watching a toddler juggle knives. By 9:15 a.m., the cracks started showing. Jira tickets failed to update. Friday's wire transfers hung in pending. Someone from customer success, I think his name was Brandon, pinged, "Hey, anyone else locked out of the billing portal?" 5 minutes later. Also, Status pages down. Ryan ignored it, or didn't see it, or assumed it would fix itself, because his understanding of back-end systems was about as advanced as a toddler smacking a TV remote and calling himself an engineer. By 9:52, my name vanished from Slack entirely. No goodbye thread. No thank you. Just erased from a directory I helped build, like carving initials into wet cement and watching someone smooth them over. Except Ryan missed something. The compliance override system doesn't run on Slack. It runs on a separate, secured workflow. The one I migrated myself after our last audit. The one with the clause Ryan never noticed on page 93. At exactly 10:11 a.m., my phone buzzed. Not a call, just a single automated message forwarded to my personal backup inbox. No subject line. Just this. Designated officer override pending. That's when I knew the lights were starting to flicker. The system was checking me back in. Not Ryan. Not his shiny new procurement intern who still thought NetSuite was a fitness app. Me. And until that override was cleared, until the designated officer of record authorized reactivation, everything stayed frozen. No vendor swaps, no invoice approvals, no CRM syncs. Nothing moved. I didn't smile. Not yet. I forwarded the message to my attorney with one line in the subject. Timer's running. Across town, I could almost picture Ryan pacing in the conference room, waving his smartwatch while some poor IT analyst tried to explain why the new vendor onboarding API was spitting out 4003 errors, and a message reading, System awaiting validation from designated compliance officer. Refer to SOC2 binder, page 93. I could have warned them, but they hadn't asked. They just erased me like a bad file. It's always the quiet women who build the tripwires no one sees coming. By noon, the wheels weren't just coming off. They were on fire, rolling downhill straight into a daycare. I watched the mess unfold from my kitchen table, a bowl of oatmeal turning to cement while my inbox lit up with a symphony of corporate despair. Every email was automatic, every alert triggered by the same architecture Ryan had called bloated 2 weeks ago. At 12:06 p.m., the first client message arrived. Subject: Urgent access issue. CRM not responding. Our team cannot access customer data. We have a meeting with a federal contractor at 2 p.m. Please escalate immediately. 2 minutes later. Subject: Billing API not responding. SLA impact. Your payment portal is offline. This constitutes a breach if unresolved within 4 hours. By 12:22 p.m., someone realized the CRM wasn't glitchy. It was dead. Not frozen, not rebooting. Flatline. The kind of dead that requires authentication from a designated officer before a single system breathes again. And that officer was me. Ryan had fired me with the same grace he reserved for dismissing a spam email. I could imagine him now, adjusting his custom-fit blazer, insisting it was just a temporary hiccup, probably muttering something like, "Have we tried restarting it?" The tech bro mantra of the damned. At 12:47, it brought in their old troubleshooter, Phil Larson, the guy who'd survived 3 CFOs and 1 literal office fire because he could fix anything with a Red Bull and 2 zip ties. Ryan never liked Phil. Too direct, too unimpressed, too real. Phil logged in, stared at the frozen access screen, and chewed his gum into the mic. "Yep, we're locked out." Pause. Root access revoked. Restart sequence frozen at phase 2. Ryan's voice strained. "What does that mean?" "Means someone pulled the damn fire alarm, and you fired the person holding the key to shut it off." That's the thing about old systems. They're ugly, duct-taped disasters. But when they fail, they don't whisper. They scream. By 1:30 p.m., finance had gone into DEFCON 3. Wire approvals were stacking up, blocked behind one line of text. Pending security officer validation. Ryan tried logging in to override manually. Denied. Procurement tried. Denied. Emergency override attempt? Denied again. Meanwhile, my offsite logs quietly pinged me every time someone failed access. I didn't even have to touch a keyboard. The system was doing exactly what it was built to do: default to the last verified compliance officer until the board formally reassigned it. Guess what no one ever did? They never reassigned the role. I poured another cup of tea and queued up a true crime podcast while the kettle screamed into the void, just like Ryan probably was. I imagined the scene, him pacing the glass conference room, that expensive watch flashing red notifications, every denial message landing like a hammer, the kind of silence that makes grown executives sweat through their tailored suits. At 2:11 p.m., legal finally joined the party. The email thread arrived with a subject line that looked like a scream in Helvetica. Urgent, system-wide access failure, legal review required. I didn't even need to open it to know what it said. I could practically hear the panic radiating from Outlook. Vendors had already started responding to the lockout. Due to failover activation, support is contractually restricted until designated officer reauthorization is complete. Translation: you pulled the kill switch, now you need the key holder. And you fired her via Slack while eating kale chips. By 3:04 p.m., a board member had been CC'd on the thread. That's when panic turns real. Not BCC'd, not quietly looped in. A full, visible CC right under legal's signature line. Somewhere downtown, I pictured Ryan realizing for the first time in his career that you can't optimize your way out of compliance law. And just when I thought my afternoon couldn't get better, I got a call from an unknown number. "Hi, Melissa? Sorry to bother you. It's Elijah, from IT. His voice cracked like he was holding a live grenade. "Just a weird question. Were you ever, officially listed as the designated officer on the SOC2 docs?" I smiled, not out of spite, just recognition. "Check the binder," I said, and hung up. 10 minutes later, the emergency meeting invite went out. Subject: SOC2 infrastructure lockdown. Mandatory review. Board oversight requested. Time: 9:00 a.m. Tuesday. They were about to sit in a room and discover the ghost they'd erased still owned the fuse box. By 4:20 that afternoon, Phil texted me a screenshot. It was the failover dashboard. Every critical system grayed out, every access box reading validation required. His message was short. They finally noticed. And below that, a blurry photo of Ryan standing in the middle of the conference room, pacing like a caged cat in a thunderstorm. I didn't grin. Not yet. I just stared at the screen for a long moment, breathing in that rare air between fury and relief. They had treated me like a ghost. Now the ghost held the fuse. By Tuesday morning, you could practically hear the panic humming across time zones. The all-caps emails began flooding in before sunrise. Legal wanted timelines, finance wanted approvals, and HR wanted plausible deniability. Ryan wanted a miracle. At 9 a.m., sharp, the emergency meeting kicked off. It wasn't in the big glass boardroom downtown, but in the smaller one on the 12th floor, the kind where the table is too glossy and everyone brings the wrong kind of fear. Ryan was already there, face tight, trying to look in control. Beside him sat Charlotte, HR director, a woman who could deliver a termination with the warmth of a voicemail. 2 attorneys from Anders & Lowell LLP joined remotely, their cameras off. When the call started, Ryan's voice came through too loud, like volume could turn fiction into authority. "I had full discretion," he said. Melissa's position was redundant under the new structure. We were advised to streamline. Charlotte nodded like a bobblehead, adding, "All actions were taken in good faith." Good faith. The phrase landed like static. These were the same people who wouldn't approve my remote work stipend because it set a precedent, and now they wanted to invoke faith while the company's infrastructure sat in lockdown. The conversation looped in circles until someone new spoke. A quiet voice from the end of the table. Priya, a junior compliance analyst. She'd been with us less than a year. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "We never actually reassigned the designated officer field. It still lists Melissa." Silence. You could hear pens stop scratching. Charlotte blinked, once. Ryan's jaw twitched like he was trying to swallow a nail. Someone muttered something about outdated systems, legacy forms, how the field was symbolic. But SOC 2 compliance doesn't care about symbolism. It cares about signatures, timestamps, and documented authority. And as of that moment, there was still only one name that met all three. Mine. At 10:18 a.m., I received a new message on LinkedIn from Ryan. No greeting, no subject, just this. "Would love to chat briefly if you're available today." Oh, Ryan. The man who fired me by Slack after midnight, now wanting a friendly little chat. I didn't reply. I just took a screenshot, titled it "Begging," chronological, and forwarded it to my lawyer. I knew exactly what he wanted, to convince me to fix everything quietly. Maybe even hire me back on a short-term contract with a premium rate. But I wasn't interested in hush money. Not yet. Let the system sit frozen a little longer. Let legal choke on their own red tape. Let the board feel what compliance actually means. At 8:57 a.m., the next morning, a man in a charcoal suit walked through Vanguard's lobby with the calm precision of someone who never rushes. Arthur Fletcher, senior auditor from Harlan & Company, the external firm that had handled our SOC 2 certifications for years. Fletcher didn't do drama. He did documentation. I'd met him 3 audits ago when he flagged our previous VP for unauthorized credential resets. That VP had resigned within the week. Fletcher entered the boardroom carrying the binder, the real, physical one, the holy scripture of compliance, hundreds of pages of policy, signatures, and amendments. He wore light gray gloves, the kind archivists use to avoid fingerprints. That's when everyone in the room knew this was no longer internal cleanup. This was an autopsy. Ryan stood to shake his hand. Fletcher gave a curt nod and sat down without returning it. He opened the binder, methodically flipping through the pages, 14, 27, 47, until he reached 93. He rotated the binder so it faced the table and tapped the highlighted paragraph with a silver pen. No one breathed. Then he read aloud, slow and deliberate. "Restart of critical infrastructure following full vendor failover shall require authentication and signed approval by the designated officer of record." He paused, lifted his eyes. "So," he said evenly, "who is she?" Not who was, not who should be, who is. Every head turned toward Ryan. His mouth opened, then closed again. Legal flipped through their own binders like maybe there was an alternate universe hidden in the margins. HR tried a smile that died halfway. But they all knew. The name hadn't been changed. The signature hadn't been replaced. The designated officer of record, confirmed in the last audit cycle, timestamped and notarized, was still Melissa Grant. Fletcher tapped the page again. "Until she signs off," he said, voice level. "The audit fails, and the system remains locked." No one argued. The room just sat there, staring at the highlighted line like it was a detonator. The moment Fletcher's words hit the air, the room fell into a vacuum. You could almost hear the fluorescent lights humming above the silence. Ryan's throat worked, but no sound came out. Charlotte from HR blinked too fast, fumbling with a pen she wasn't writing anything with. The legal team's cameras remained black squares on Zoom, probably muting themselves to whisper, "Oh, hell." Fletcher didn't flinch. He simply let the silence ferment until it turned into discomfort. Then he closed the binder halfway, folded his gloved hands on top, and said in that same patient, clinical tone, "You deleted your own compliance officer." Ryan tried for a smile, the brittle corporate kind that belongs in an HR poster. "Look, there must be a way to—" Fletcher cut him off with a raised hand. "There's always a way," he said. But not without her. That was the first time someone in that room spoke the truth. Outside, the hallway was dead quiet. Inside, everyone pretended to check notes or sip coffee, anything to avoid eye contact with the man whose name had just become synonymous with catastrophic oversight. The first major client call came before noon. A federal infrastructure account worth half of Vanguard's quarterly revenue. Their project director, Dana Morales, didn't bother with small talk. Her voice was crisp, surgical. "We're now 36 hours into unresolved system inaccessibility. If we don't receive verified reauthorization from your designated officer by close of business today, we'll begin breach proceedings under Section 12 of the SLA. Ryan stammered, "We're working on a temporary—" "We don't negotiate protocol," Dana said, and hung up. Click. One sound, and millions of dollars of trust evaporated. By 12:30 p.m., the board was in full bunker mode. The same people who'd ignored every budget proposal I'd ever written were suddenly compliance experts, quoting acronyms they couldn't define. Half the executives called in sick. The rest stayed glued to the boardroom table, trading blame like it was currency. Finance blamed legal. Legal blamed IT. IT blamed HR. HR blamed process ambiguity. And in the center of it all, Ryan was melting down. He tried to argue that I'd never informed him of my status as designated officer. That defense lasted exactly 4 minutes, until Phil dropped a message into the board's email thread. Subject: Role confirmation. Compliance update. From Phil Larson to Ryan Mercer. Date: 6 months ago. Attachment: PDF, audit memo, signed and initialed. In the body, one line: "Please confirm this update before end of week to meet audit window." Ryan's response back then had been nothing but a raised hands emoji. Now, projected on a 90-inch screen, it looked like a confession written in neon. Phil followed up with another message, looping legal for good measure. For context, this thread is archived on the compliance node and auto-backed to external counsel for SOC traceability. Happy to resend, if needed. You could practically feel the temperature drop. Someone from the board muttered, "How did we not catch this?" Nobody answered. Meanwhile, I was home, barefoot, sitting on my balcony with my cat asleep in the sunlight and a latte in hand. When the next email arrived, I actually laughed out loud. Subject: Consultant inquiry. Short-term reinstatement offer. From Interim Relations. Vanguard Systems. Melissa, in light of current circumstances, the company would like to extend a short-term consulting engagement to support immediate system restoration. Rate: 3x former salary. Scope: Designated Officer Reauthorization and Audit Liaison. Duration: Negotiable. No apology, no ownership. Just desperation written in corporate jargon. I stared at it for a moment, then forwarded it to my lawyer with the note. Attach this after page 93. Because now, it wasn't about access, it was about respect, and they were still 3 exits behind on that highway. By Thursday morning, the board had stopped pretending Ryan could be saved. They moved into quiet damage control mode, the kind where decisions happen behind closed doors and everyone pretends to be shocked later. The vote was swift, 4-1 in favor of immediate suspension pending internal review. The lone dissent came from the same board member who once said compliance is mostly vibes. When the verdict landed, Ryan was mid-sentence in a conference call, trying to rebrand the disaster as a transitional audit enhancement. He didn't even make it to lunch. HR sent the termination email at 11:14 a.m., the most sterilized masterpiece of passive aggression I'd ever seen. Melissa, we hope this message finds you well. In light of recent developments, the organization would like to explore the possibility of reinstating your role as designated officer to facilitate critical system recovery. Your expertise remains highly valued. Please let us know your availability for a brief conversation. The subtext was clear. We burned the bridge, paved it over with arrogance, and now we're standing in the crater waving a white flag. I didn't respond right away. I went for a walk. Bought a notebook I didn't need, a coffee I didn't want, just to feel what freedom tasted like when you finally owned your time again. Then, as the sun hit the sidewalk just right, I typed 14 words. Please send requests through my attorney. Rates and terms attached. Sincerely, Melissa. The terms were generous. For me, anyway. Triple rate, 2-week minimum, no non-compete, and, my favorite clause, no NDA regarding the failover incident. I even added one more condition. Ryan Mercer was to be completely excluded from any meeting, documentation, or system I touched. No presence, no proxy, no shadow in the Zoom gallery. I ended the contract with a little poetic flourish. Client to provide own pen. They signed within the hour. No edits, no counteroffer, just a desperate digital signature from someone in legal with expedite courier typed in the notes. Panic makes even the proud efficient. But I didn't go back. You don't walk again through the place that erased you. There's something sacred about staying gone. They wanted me out, and now they got their wish. My body was gone, but my authority wasn't. Instead, I sent the binder. Not their sanitized copy, but mine, the real one. Annotated margins, color-coded tabs, red ink cross-references, sticky notes marking every vendor clause and exception trigger. Decades of buried knowledge, every line dated and initialed. I packed it myself, wrapped it in brown paper, and attached one yellow post-it on the cover. Please review before attempting to fix what you don't understand. The courier was a college kid named Trent, hoodie, earbuds, smelled faintly of vape juice and energy drink. Perfect. Don't hand it to anyone who doesn't say thank you, I told him. He nodded solemnly. Got it. 2 hours later, I got a delivery confirmation email from legal. Binder received. Systems restoration in progress. By then, Ryan's credentials were already revoked. Phil sent me a screenshot from inside Slack. Someone had changed the alerts channel topic to now accepting prayers and pizza for surviving idiots. The quiet ones always have the best timing. That's the thing about slow revenge. It doesn't have to scream. It just burns steady, cold, efficient. The final board meeting wasn't even called a meeting. The subject line read, System Reactivation Protocol. Immediate. No exclamation mark. Just dread. They sent the Zoom invite 3 times. The subject changed with every resend. First audit resolution call, then emergency compliance review, and finally, critical recovery session. Attendance required. I joined exactly 2 minutes late, on purpose. When my camera clicked on, I made sure they saw everything. Calm lighting, neutral background, tidy desk, binder perfectly centered in front of me, chamomile tea still steaming, a picture of composure against their chaos. At the head of the real-world table sat Arthur Fletcher, the auditor. He looked like someone officiating a corporate funeral. Without greeting, he opened the binder, my binder, to page 93 and began to read aloud. Restart of critical infrastructure following vendor failover shall require authentication and signed approval by the designated officer of record. He paused. The words hung like smoke over an open flame. Then he lifted his eyes, scanning the faces in the room. Legal, HR, board reps, a hollow-eyed IT manager, and Ryan. Pale, silent, looking like a man who'd finally realized the light at the end of the tunnel was a train. Fletcher's voice sharpened. So, who is she? No one answered. You could hear a faint laptop fan whirring, someone exhaling too hard through their nose. Charlotte shifted in her seat. Ryan just stared down at the table, hands clasped, lips white. I waited a heartbeat longer, then leaned forward, voice calm but absolute. I am. It landed like a gavel strike, clean, unarguable. No rebuttals, no technical hair-splitting. The silence that followed wasn't shock. It was recognition. The collective realization that every attempt to erase me had only bound me tighter into the system's DNA. I placed my fingertips lightly on the binder and said, "Before we proceed, I'll need a formal apology. In writing, on company letterhead, acknowledging that my removal was executed without due process, and that my reinstatement is not a favor, but a correction." HR twitched. Legal started typing something they didn't believe, and Ryan didn't move. He just sat there, the human embodiment of regret. Fletcher nodded once, crisp and unsentimental. "Until she signs off," he said. "The audit fails and the system stays dead." No one objected. There was nothing left to spin. I offered them a polite smile, the kind you give before closing a vault door, and then said, "You know where to send the apology." Then I ended the call. Just a click. No drama, no victory speech. The sound of finality has never been louder than the silence after leave meeting. I sat back, took a slow sip of tea, and let the warmth spread. Outside, the city hummed, unaware that one quiet compliance officer had just outmaneuvered an entire boardroom. They'd mistaken silence for surrender. Now they knew better. I didn't celebrate. Not in the way movies show it. No champagne, no triumphant music swelling under the credits. Just quiet. The kind that settles deep in your bones after a long fight. I closed my laptop, leaned back in my chair, and listened to the sound of my kettle cooling. For the first time in months, there was no ping from Slack, no late-night quick check-in, no half-hearted apology hidden between corporate buzzwords. Just silence, and the faint purr of my cat, Pickles, claiming victory on my paperwork. Later that afternoon, my attorney called. "They agreed to all your terms," she said, sounding half impressed, half bewildered. "The apology letters being drafted by HR and legal together. That never happens." I smiled. "That's because neither of them knows how to write without lying. Collaboration might help." When the courier arrived with the letter, it was printed on heavy paper, the kind companies reserve for investor decks and ceremonial nonsense. The heading read, "Formal Statement of Correction." It was everything I'd asked for: acknowledgement of wrongful termination, affirmation of my authority as designated officer, commitment to reinstate my policies in full, and a written note of apology signed by every member of the board. At the bottom, a small line typed in sterile legal language: "This statement shall remain on file for all future compliance reviews." That was my real victory. Permanence. My name carved back into the company's legal skeleton, where it had always belonged. They still needed me to complete the reauthorization. Fine. I sent the required digital signature through my attorney's portal, executed the protocol, and restored access with one final keystroke. Systems came back online, logs cleared, servers hummed again like a waking city. For them, it was salvation. For me, it was closure. Phil texted an hour later. "Back online. Everything stable. Ryan, is gone. CFO wants to send you flowers. I told them you prefer coffee." I replied with a single thumbs-up emoji. Then I muted the thread forever. That night, I sat on my balcony with a notebook, the same one I'd bought the day HR emailed me their grovel. I opened it and wrote the first page in ink. Compliance isn't control, it's memory. Because that's what everyone forgets. Companies treat procedures like red tape, but it's really lineage, a record of who cared enough to build something that lasts. And when they erase those people, the memory fights back. By morning, the apology letter had gone public. Not intentionally. Someone from finance leaked it to an industry forum, maybe out of guilt, maybe out of admiration. The thread title read, Vanguard Systems apologizes to fired compliance officer after 180 numbers outage. The post went viral in every security and audit channel within hours. Replies poured in. This is why you don't fire the person who knows where the documentation lives. Absolute legend. Page 93, supremacy. Even the audit subreddit turned it into a meme. Screenshots of my binder with captions like, the real weapon of mass correction. I laughed harder than I had in months. Meanwhile, the company scrambled to control the narrative. They released a bland press statement about internal miscommunication during a transition period and swift corrective measures. I didn't bother reading past the first sentence. Everyone already knew the truth. The quiet woman they underestimated had saved their entire infrastructure from their own incompetence. A week later, my lawyer wired the payment. 6 figures for 10 hours of consultation. That's what respect looks like when written in numbers. I used part of it to start something new. A consulting firm for compliance design and crisis restoration. The name? Page 93 Consulting. Our tagline was simple. We build systems that remember who built them. The first client arrived within 2 days. A mid-sized SaaS company that had outgrown their internal governance and needed help restructuring. Their CEO's email opened with, "We heard what happened at Vanguard." I bet they did. Everyone had. Before the kickoff meeting, I checked the mirror. Same short hair, same blazer, but a steadier gaze. I looked like someone who'd finally learned the cost of silence and how to make it pay interest. The new office was small, just 2 rooms in a renovated warehouse downtown. Concrete floors, big windows, and a smell of burnt espresso that never quite went away. But it was mine. No Slack channels, no middle managers calling alignment meetings that meant defend your job. Just a quiet hum of focus, a wall of binders lined like old friends, and a team that actually read the documents they signed. By the time the first page 93 consulting contract was inked, Vanguard had gone through its second CEO in 6 months. Ryan Mercer's exit hadn't been the clean HR send-off he probably imagined. The board had packaged it as a mutual separation, but the whispers said otherwise, that the SOC2 failure had triggered an automatic clause in their federal contracts. One of the agencies had invoked a temporary suspension pending leadership review. Translation? They'd lost millions before lunch. I never reached out, and neither did he. Some endings don't need closure, they just need distance. Still, every now and then, I'd get a stray LinkedIn notification. Ryan Mercer has updated his profile. Consultant, Strategic Operations Advisor. I'd sip my coffee, smile, and click ignore. There's something poetic about a man who once fired you through Slack, now selling resilience frameworks on the internet. The apology letter from Vanguard stayed framed on my shelf, not as a trophy, but as evidence. Proof that documentation is power. When people asked why I kept it, I'd say, because paper doesn't gaslight you. That line always made interns laugh, but it wasn't a joke. Paper remembers. Within 3 months, page 93 had 6 clients, all word of mouth, all crisis-ridden companies who thought compliance was optional until it wasn't. I'd sit in conference rooms full of nervous executives and tell them what no one at Vanguard had wanted to hear. If your governance structure relies on personality instead of policy, you don't have a system. You have a ticking clock. They'd nod, take notes, and hire me again. Revenge had turned into a business model. One afternoon, Phil Larson called, the old IT vet. "Heard you're running your own shop now," he said. "Trying to?" I replied. He chuckled. "Good. You were the only one who ever read the whole SOC2 binder without crying." We talked for an hour about nothing and everything. How Vanguard replaced Slack with some new platform called Hive. How HR now required 3 sign-offs before any termination. how page 93 had become an inside joke in the industry. Before hanging up, he said, "You know, they still keep your policy framework, haven't changed a word." "Good," I said. Maybe they finally learned not to edit the manual written by the person who built the house. That night, I reread my own binder. Not Vanguard's, but the new one. My company's. Every clause, every contingency, every sentence crafted in the language of quiet revenge. At the top of the title page, I'd written in pen, "Systems built on arrogance collapse quietly, but they still collapse." When I closed it, I realized something that surprised me. I wasn't angry anymore. The rage that used to keep me sharp had melted into clarity. I hadn't won because they lost. I'd won because I'd stopped waiting for permission to matter. On a whim, I opened my YouTube channel, the one my friends had convinced me to start, half-jokingly called Corporate Checkmate. I uploaded a short video titled, "They Fired Their Designated Officer, the SOC 2 Compliance Takedown." A retelling of everything, names changed for legal comfort, but every detail intact. Within hours, the comments section lit up. "Workplace revenge done right? Quiet professionalism is lethal. This is the best compliance horror story I've ever heard." I laughed. Somewhere out there, someone else was probably staring at their own Slack message that read, "Turn in your badge," wondering if they'd ever get justice. Maybe my story would remind them that sometimes revenge doesn't roar. It signs forms, triggers failovers, and waits for the system to ask, "Who is she?" Because that's what it always comes down to. Documentation, patience, and the unshakable calm of a person who knows exactly where the wires are buried. So when people ask how it felt to bring down a multi-million-dollar meltdown with a single protocol, I tell them the truth. It felt like balance. The audit was complete, the system restored. And me? I was finally off the clock.